I want to introduce the founder of Isaiah House, who in 1987 had a vision. And it was a vision that had taken so much courage. I know the hours and the work that you put into it, your heart and soul, and you were coming from a place of pain and loss, and how you could create this very, very beautiful mission. And you know, it was something that started this little house on Prince Street, but think about it, I mean, the impact it has had on people. But it's so important, and the reason it's still here today is because of the blueprint that you set for all of us to be sure that we took care of the people that no one else was taking care of. And where a lot of the directors in some of the other houses, they're afraid. They say, but the volunteers, they won't tolerate this. We can't take this person. And because of Kathie, I can say to each one of you that sat on the couch and interviewed, this is who we take care of. And that is because of her. So after all these years, the work, it hasn't changed. Like, we haven't veered from her original vision. We're still doing what it was you wanted us and what you wanted to happen in the world. It's still happening. And after all these years, I mean, look it out here. Here's all these people that are just supporting and inspired by what you've started. So,
hello, dear hearts. I always call the volunteers dear hearts because, of course, that's exactly what you are. Can you hear me all right?
No. Put it right up to your mouth, yeah. Right up to your mouth.
Oh, really?
There you
Close
go.
like
Yeah.
that? Okay. This will be a little challenging, I think, but I will try.
Up to your mouth, yeah.
It has been said that a sacred space is a place deemed to be sacred or hallowed. With Kristen, where is she? With Kristen, this is just a little different than I expected. It's lovely. I love it. It's wonderful. It's a little disorienting. Okay. Kristen's enormously loving and very brave heart. And all of you who work with her, this, of course, beautifully fits the description of a sacred place. Because it truly is a sacred place. Not just at the end of life, but every day to that end of life. It is a very sacred space. Many lessons we have learned from our residents, and actually our residents have become my wisest teachers of all. They're the wisest teachers of my whole life. I do know that. During close to 3 years of preparation, we read many books about hospice, which was really quite new then. This was in 1984 that we started, that I began thinking very seriously about this. And I had become a nurse in the middle of my life because I wanted to care for people who were dying. What a strange way to go to nursing school and say, why are you here? Because I want to take care of people who were dying. But Aunt Janice was another person who did the same thing. And we were both in our 40s, and to school we came. Okay, so but we decided, how are we going to learn about what do we do? What will we do in this house? We need to learn more about this. And so we read many books, and we attended many talks. And then in 1987, we learned about an offering in Toronto called The Healing of the Dying. And we thought, heavenly days, what is this? The Healing of the Dying. It sounded extraordinary. So 3 of us got into a car and drove to Toronto. It was a magical 3 days. The teacher was a woman named Kathie Quinlan. I love her dearly. She's a woman probably in her 80s, as I am now. She she was just remarkable in the things she taught us about healing the dying. So we brought home many wonderful bits of information that really became our foundation. They were what we learned that weekend became foundational for what we were going to do at Isaiah House. Now, we were just a little group of folks that were thinking about this and how are we going to go about it. It took 3 years, almost 3 years, to do this. And it was a wonderful journey. It was an exciting time, and we were an outreach of Corpus Christi Church on Prince Street, and it was just a very lovely experience. And, I often used to say to my dear Bill, I think I may die not really believing that this happened. But it did, didn't it? And you are all here tonight, 36 years later, and I'm thinking, this really happened. And I'm astonished and grateful beyond any measure. You can't know how grateful I am to all of you. And thank you. Okay, so what did we learn? Okay. Well, I shared some of the things in the past. I have shared some of these things with some of you in the past when I've talked. And I'm going to say them again because I think they're important. And I think we need to keep remembering them. Know that the dying time is sacred, not just at the end. I think it's sacred the moment that ambulance arrives with the new person. Because it is a sacred place. And every moment is a sacred moment in that house where we are journeying with people who are dying. Now, the history of the house is interesting, and there's a story that I'm going to tell you tonight that I've not shared before very often, maybe occasionally, but certainly not to a group of people. But I think I want to share this story because I think it's important. All right. I realized that what we did was an astonishing thing and had some truly historic dimensions. Our nation, when we started, was in the midst of a pandemic, different from AIDS. It was the AIDS, different from COVID, it was the AIDS pandemic. And it was an extraordinary time, and many of us who are older do remember that time very well. It was a scary time for many people, a very frightening time. And I think we never had to talk about whether we would consider welcoming people with AIDS. We just knew that we would. We said, of course we would. And but there was so much fear. There was so much fear. A fear that prevented the other little houses from saying yes. And I can only say how sad for them, because the experiences were beyond any experiences we could have imagined. They were quite beautiful, and I will tell you one especially. In 1987, the year we opened, the CDC issued its universal precautions, which was gloves when handling body secretions. Good grief, you don't know what people were telling us. One young man said that he was in the hospital, and he asked for a newspaper. So a woman came in to give him the paper, garbed with a gown, a mask, and a mask. And what was the other thing? There were 3 things that he had. Well, it doesn't matter. He was well fortified. Not to have any contact with this person. One young woman said to us, people walked away from me when they heard what I had. It was a time, oh my. And I think about it, the older I've become, the more I've thought of it. Because in the early days, we just kept going and kept welcoming people and doing what we were doing. Now, though, I find myself often thinking back to that time and thinking that was an extraordinary time. And I'm so grateful for the decision that we made. When new folks would come to be volunteers, we were starting from scratch. So we had to have a staff, we had to have caregivers. It was all quite an adventure. And when the person would come for an interview, we would meet with them, and at the end of the interview, we would very simply say, and of course, we will be welcoming people with AIDS. Not one person stood up and left the room. Not one. The fear was so great, I will tell you this. One of our dearest volunteers told me that her daughter had told her that if she took care of someone with AIDS at Isaiah House, she would not let her touch the baby. The fear was beyond understanding. It was very, very so sad. But as I said, we were so grateful to each of the volunteers, the new volunteers coming in, that they would just say, okay. And there were many volunteers who would come more often when it was a person with AIDS and sign up for more shifts because they so believed that this was something they wanted to do, and all of the experiences we had. So, one of which I want to tell you about. I will tell you the person's name because it was in the paper when he died, and the article said that Tim Dunn had died of AIDS at Isaiah House. He was our first person. Can you imagine such a thing? The first 2 years, we were very open to welcoming someone with AIDS. But in the first 2 years, we never were able to say yes because we had the 2 beds and they were always filled when a referral came for a person with AIDS. And so we were very excited in the summer of 1989 when a young man was referred to us in the middle of July. And he came to us, was with us for 2 weeks. He was quite beautiful. He had been a male model. We had seen his picture in magazines. He was so handsome and such a nice young man. He had traveled all over the world. He had lunch with movie stars. He had a life we can't imagine. But here he was now in his early 30s, dying of AIDS. I will never ever forget him. It was great having him, and for our first time, it was quite astonishing that we would have someone who was so well known and had such a story behind him. Okay, so his family loved him dearly. He had 7 siblings. There were 8 children in the Dunn family, big Irish family in East Rochester. They were always visiting. They said that his fame never touched him. He was always just the same wonderful brother that they always had known and loved. And they were, it was a wonderful first experience with an AIDS patient. So it was the Sunday of our ice cream social, which was our only fundraiser. And it seemed that Tim was very near his death. And indeed, after the social was over, I went over because I was going to be there until 11 o'clock that evening. And the family was not there, and they'd been in and out through the day. They honestly didn't seem to think that he was going to die. I think the father stood the night before by the door and he said, oh no, he's not, he's been like this before. He's going to come through it. And so they had been in and out through Sunday, but in the evening hours, we were very much alone, the 2 of us. At 10 o'clock that night, the doorbell rang. And when I answered it, there was a young woman carrying a little, we used to call them nip and naps, but you know, the little carrier for a baby. And this was his sister, who had given birth to a baby when her brother was in the hospital. They were in the same hospital, Strong. And the baby had been very ill, and they didn't know if she would survive, but she did, and the sister had taken her home. So that evening, at 10 o'clock, there she is at the door. She walks in with the little carrier. She sets it on the floor, went over by the bed, and Tim was not speaking then, but had talked to him a bit, went back, picked up the baby, put the baby on Tim's chest. She laid the baby face down on his chest. And we just sat and waited. And Tim died. And I will never forget it. How could I? And it was the most beautiful thing. She said, Tim has given his life to her. Wasn't that an amazing beginning? And that was our first patient with AIDS. It was just a remarkable story. So thank you for letting me tell you this. I thought, I think I would like people to know some of the things that happened in the early years. So at any rate, there's a little afterthought on this. 3 weeks after he died, a package came in the mail. And it was a little box. It was addressed to me. I opened it up, and inside there's a little tiny bell. Do you remember the Druid bell, Marge? No, it was like a little marble. Wasn't it like a little silver marble? I was trying to think, how do I explain what this looked like? But it was like a little ball, a little bell, just a little marble. And the lore was that if you just kind of did this with it in your hand, it would summon the angels. Wasn't it lovely, though? It was a perfect way. It was a perfect way to remember this lovely young man and his family. And so we had someone we knew who did calligraphy made a little sign that said Tim's Druid bell for summoning angels. And we hung it in the little front room, the little visiting room on the first floor. And there it was. And it was just always so lovely to see it. And we knew, and there were people who did take it into the room. I remember some daughters who were waiting for their mom to die, and they went in and they just kept walking around the bed, ringing it, and then they put it back in the little dish, and then she died very shortly after. At any rate, so this was our first experience with someone with AIDS, and it was extraordinary for all of us. It touched us deeply, and we were so grateful that we were so blessed with there were so many. There were many young people who came for those first 20 years, many men and women. Most were young, some were a bit older, but most were young. So thank you for letting me tell you about them. I hadn't spoken of them so much before, but the older I've gotten, I thought I've gone back thinking about the early years and thought, gosh, that was kind of a historic thing we did, because everyone was so scared, so scared. Oh, when I told you about not touching the baby, can you imagine? This is the way people were feeling. So what we did, we had people come in, we found folks who were well-versed in AIDS, and we asked them to come to Isaiah and to speak to our volunteers, and we would say to the volunteers, bring your family members too, because they're so frightened. So they would do that, and we did it several times, and so people were feeling very comfortable, and it was a very precious time, a very, very precious time. We have two universal human experiences. We all are born, and we all will die. Many wise folks suggest we live each day as if it may be our last. And that makes quite a difference. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross said, if you live each day as if it is your last, one day you will be right. And Mark Twain said, the two most important days in your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why. Now, many of the folks who have known me a while know that I love quotes. I'm always writing down different quotes that I think, I want to have it, I want to remember what that is. And so these are just quotes that I feel relate to what you are all doing at Isaiah House. Our ability to care is the heart of our humanity. Henry Nouwen has a beautiful definition of compassion. There are many definitions of compassion. But Henry Nouwen said, compassion is full immersion in the condition of being human. Think about that. Full immersion in the condition of being human. It's my favorite. Henry Nouwen is my favorite one. Not that that matters, but it is. Julia Lane was a nurse who in 1983 had written an article for a nursing journal, and she said that spirit is a fragile vessel holding the essence of who we are. It is a sacred place. Another person said that hospice was a place for the consecration of death. The consecration of death. And Nancy Poor, in her book, Living into Dying, talked about layers of personality peeling away like the layers of an onion. That peeling can be exhausting. And I imagine that all of you who have been at the bedside have seen that exhaustion coming. Yes. The dying have given us many gifts. They truly have been my wisest teachers in my life. And I suspect for many of you, you might feel the same way. There's so many things we learn from them. And they have many gifts to give us. One I'm thinking of is the authenticity of the dying. They're just so really themselves. There's nothing fake they're just themselves. And I think they challenge us to be ourselves with them. Authenticity. The uncanniness of the dying. They see through us. I remember one day we had a new volunteer who had gone into the front room. And when she left the room, I was in the room a little bit later, and the lady said to me, "You know, that young woman seemed very nervous." I said, "Did she?" I said, "Well, you know, this is her first day. So I think she probably was a little nervous." But she could sense that, she could perceive that. And then Judith was 43 years old. She had 2 children. 2 hours before she died, she said, "I feel as if I am in labor." And we said, "You are. You're laboring to release your spirit, wasn't she?" How beautiful that she could say that to us 2 hours before she died. We don't ever forget these stories, do we? I'm sure you don't either. The stories that you witness at Isaiah, and at all the little houses of the dying. Every one of us who watched the dying. My goodness. They have been my wisest teachers, and they've also taught me the value of listening. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, how I loved her. I was always going to write her a letter. I didn't, and she died. But I went to the Women's in Seneca Falls because Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was inducted into the Women's Hall of Fame. And I met her daughter, who was a darling. And I said, "Your mother taught us so much. She taught us so much from her books." When we were starting Isaiah House, because we were all so new. We were just starting something that we didn't know what to do. So we had to be reading and learning from wonderful people like her. Elizabeth spoke about the silence that goes beyond words. The silence that goes beyond words. St. Benedict tells us to listen with the ear of our heart. Listening with your eyes, your ears, your hands, and your heart. Listening, I think, is the most special thing that we can do for folks is to listen to them. There was a wonderful hospice article many years, and a gentleman in San Francisco was addressing a group of hospice caregivers, and it was a wonderful article. We actually had it at the house. And at the very end, he said, "Sit and do nothing. Listen to the stories." So I guess that's the point I feel really strongly about, as you can tell. It's not what we say, just listen to the story. stories. Sit and do nothing. Listen to the stories. Cecily Saunders was an amazing woman who was a social worker, a nurse, and a physician. And she really is kind of the founder of the modern hospice movement. And in the 50s, she was just saying, we have to do something better for our folks that are dying. And she was the foundress of St. Christopher's Hospice in London. And there's a wonderful story that she was taking a gentleman through the hospice one day. And he said to her at one point, "My good woman, you have no intensive care unit." And she said, "My good man, every unit is an intensive care unit." And of course it is. Of course it is. I love that story. And I loved her. I was going to write her a letter too, and I didn't. Oh my goodness. Just to say thank you for showing us the way, showing us how to do this. She was an amazing woman. She died in 2005. I looked it up on my iPad. Which I technologically somewhat challenged, but manage it a little bit. Okay. Try to be comfortable with silence. That's not easy, is it? We live in a world of sensory overload, don't we? My God, it's so noisy. And so I think your ability to listen attentively will make a difference when you are with the folks at the bedside. And then there's the question of tears. What about tears? Can we have tears? Well, we have a wonderful tear story. We had a woman who was 59 years old. She told us that she hadn't really been a very nice person in her life. We really liked her a lot. She was kind of a little different, but really quite fun. And we really liked her. So at any rate, one day, a friend came to visit her. And as the friend was leaving, she was crying. And so we escorted the friend to the door, said goodbye to her, and we went back into the room. And Jones was looking very pensive, and she said, I forgot to tell you the most important part. When the friend left the room, she was crying. Joan says, it's nice to know you're worth someone's tears. Think of the people who never have tears for them. Yeah, it's nice to know. Nice to know. We were very grateful to that friend. I thought that was wonderful. Touch. There was an article in a nursing journal many years ago, and they used the term skin hunger. Skin hunger. Imagine, for some people, they have not known the gift of touch. Now, I have to tell you, though, we have to be careful with this. With permission, I will say, I had gone to the hospital to meet a young man who was going to come to us, and the social worker said, he does not want to be touched. Well, when I was standing beside the bed and we were conversing, the covers were up to here, and I was so sad for him. I touched him. I touched his shoulder through all the blankets and everything. I touched his shoulder. "Don't do that," he said. And I said, "I am so sorry. So-and-so told me you did not want to be touched. I apologize to you. I should not have done that." When I went back to the house, I sat down to write the little note that we would always write when we got home from the hospital or the home where we had met our patient. And I told them what I had done and to please be mindful of that. He did not want to be touched. It was interesting. He was only 29. He would allow us to give morning care, and as soon as it was finished, he would say, "You may go now." And folks would leave the room, and because the motherly people, we have so many who are just so nurturing and loving, and the men too. Oh, that was not a good thing to say. I'm sorry. But all of you who are there are loving, caring, attentive people, and to not be able to do it was hard. All the while he was there, it was not easy. I never will forget that. So I think do it, yes, touching with permission. But oh dear, how sad for folks that are never touched. Here are some thoughts that I've gathered over the years for being with the dying. None of them will be strange to you. Approach each dying person as a teacher. Oh my goodness, my wisest lessons, the most astute lessons have been from the dying. What will I learn from this person? Could be a question. Approach each bed with reverence. This is a holy work. And please, please, I'm asking you to say the D word. Say the word die. Even Ecclesiastes said, for everything there is a season, a time to be born and a time to die. Now, there can be exceptions. Christian told me about a family who could not say the word. And of course, you would not. So, but that's unusual. That's very unusual. But if someone could not, for whatever reason or what their history was, that is theirs, and it's special for them, and that would need to be honored. But oh my goodness, I just think it's a word that people need to hear. I remember we went to the hospital once to meet someone who was coming, and he said no while we were there. And when we came out to the hall, I said to the social worker, well, whatever happened? And he said, well, a lot of the doctors here dance around the D word. Well, much of society dances around the D word. They don't want to say it, and it's really quite a beautiful word. Is this birthing and dying, the two things we will all have in common. Okay. Now I'm going to just say, does anyone know the time? I have no idea. But, am I okay? I'm thinking, I'll do this part real kind of quick because I really got a long time. Am I okay? All right.
I'll get the hook.
What?
I'll get the hook. When you're done over, I'll hook you right out.
Oh, okay. But Kathie, going back to the event in Toronto, Kathie Quinlan taught us really the foundation of, they were foundational teachings to us. And we actually had her come once to Isaiah House, and she stayed the whole weekend, and she was wonderful. She did a teaching event for our caregivers, and it was really quite wonderful. So, but I think this might be helpful just to have an you're aware of this, but just to put it in some perspective. Hospice is guided by 6 principles. The first is it's holistic. Of course, it's holistic. Treating the whole person. The second is palliative. And here, holistic in treating all dimensions of pain. The physical, the emotional, the spiritual, and the social. A quick little story, Stephen Levine, I don't know if any of you are familiar with his writings, but I love him so. He died, I looked it up, he died. But what a nice, he was wonderful. The book is called Who Dies? An investigation into something living and something dying. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the exact title. But he taught us so very much. And the book Who Dies is quite beautiful. I know that chapter 17 is on suicide. And it's beautifully done. And all through the years at Isaiah, whenever we learned of anyone who had suffered the loss of a dear one to suicide, we would make a copy of that article and send it to them. And a gentleman said to me once, after his wife had died, he said, I have read it 12 times. I will keep reading it. It really was helping him. So Stephen Levine, I had such an affection for him and admiration for him. And I was privileged to see him once in Skinny Atlas when I went to a workshop, and he was telling us about a story about a young woman who was in her 30s and she had 11 children. She had been in a motor vehicle accident, and they knew she would die, but she just could not seem to die. So he met with the staff, and they told him much about her. And he went into her bed bedroom and sat beside her bed. And he said, "You're worried. You're trying to die, but you're worried about your children, aren't you?" He had taken the time to learn about the arrangement that was made for each of those 11 children. And he read it to her. And as he read it, a tear, of course, went down her cheek. And she died within the next 15 minutes. And I think, oh my goodness, yes, it has many dimensions. That having the palliative nature is palliative in the physical realms, the emotional, the spiritual, the social. Okay, ready? The patient is in control. Do you know how much control people lose when they are dying? Oh my goodness. And one woman said to me, she came in the morning and that afternoon, she said, "I've had to let go of so many things." And she had many more things yet to be relinquishing, sadly. The patient and family is a unit of care. We can't forget that sometimes the person in the bed is not the person who's suffering most. It's the person sitting beside. And so just knowing that the family needs, oh no, wait a minute, I'm sorry, I got off my track here. The control. All right, we need to respect, oh, that was Mary Kay, I remember her name, who said she had to let go of so many things. We need to respect their choices. One lady said to me one day, "Kathie, would you please move my overbed table 2 inches to the left?" And I said, "Of course." I had never forgotten it. I had never forgotten her, nor what she said. Just imagine if she had a ceiling, a floor, 4 walls. That was her world. And she would ask me to move the table 2 inches to the left, which I gladly did. So we need to be mindful of what that is like to lose so much control. The patient and family is the unit of care, I told you, and wanting to be very mindful of how they're doing. And and I'm sure that you do this in many different ways. I think that regrets are very painful, and waiting to die is a gift of time, actually. And I remember saying, what is it you need to say to your father? What is it your father needs to hear you say? Just giving little nudges, so giving gentle nudges, opening doors, stepping back, respecting the sanctity of the time, but knowing that that is their realm. There's nothing more you can do. You need to step back. We were always stepping back, giving little gentle nudges, and then stepping back. Living while dying, the value of the life review. There are some people that feel that the life review is a necessary task of dying, and I kind of think it would be, wouldn't it? And just being mindful of that. Life review, we are our stories. And then, as I said, many people consider it a necessary task. And then bereavement, of course, which following folks for a time after. In our early days, a gentleman named Tom, whose wife had died, came to visit us one day, and he had a pack of books in his arm. And he said, "I've been to the library to get some books because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to grieve. So maybe these books will help me." Okay. Now let me see here. The needs of the dying. Again, these are all things that Kathie taught us those many, many years ago. The need not to be alone. That doesn't mean that someone has to be in the room every moment, but they have to know they're not going to be abandoned, as some people do feel abandoned. And so knowing that they will not be abandoned, and if they need someone in the room, the person will be there. The need to express oneself. Not everyone has this need to express oneself, but many do. and that there is someone who can listen again. It all comes back to the listening. That's the most frequent word one will read. Listen, listen, listen. Just give them the grace, give them your time of listening. Watch for cues. I think of Carol, who was our very first resident. She was a lovely young woman, and about 5 nights before she died, Arlene and I were with her through the night, and we were standing on either side of the bed, and she had a very high fever, and we were just trying to do some measures to bring her fever down. And she hadn't spoken in many days. But she was wide awake and looking at us so intently, and all of a sudden, her expression changed. Her mouth turned in a way that I can't do it, but I don't have to. But at any rate, her expression changed. And I said, Carol, your expression has changed. Is something concerning you? It takes so long. She hadn't spoken in days. She never spoke after that. But she did say, it takes so long. So watch, don't just listen. If we hadn't said anything, she wouldn't have said that. And I almost think she needed to say that. She needed to say, darn it all, this is taking so long. Okay. The same lady, beautiful Carol, how we loved her. You remember Kathie? And when we went to visit her, we asked a question that we would always ask when we went to visit. The question at some point, when things were calm and we could ask the question, say, Carol, what are you hoping for? And Carol said, oh, without any hesitation, I need more time with Mark. Now, Carol and her husband had 3 boys. The oldest boy had been killed in a car accident 2 years earlier. And she said, Mark has never grieved his brother. And we thought, oh dear, this is not good. So I spoke to the young, I need time with him. I need time with him alone. I'm so glad I asked her the question. If we hadn't asked the question, this would never have happened. Because the next day I said to the friend, he always came with his friend Peter, and I said, Peter, Carol needs time with her son alone. They would always come in together. They were coming from work. And he said, not to worry. So the next day, truck pulls up, door slams, truck drove away. And in came this very tentative young man who just thought, oh my, I'll never forget him coming to the door. Now I had put a chair right by the mom's head, the head of her bed. And I went into the room with him. He sat down, and I quickly left the room and closed the door. And in a little while, oh, we heard such crying coming from the room, and we were crying ourselves, of course. We were so relieved to think that he had at least begun, he had this time with his mother, and they could talk about his brother. So I think that that's an important question to say, what are you hoping for? Many wonderful answers we had. Okay. The need to be remembered. This is my favorite of the stories of the needs. I added this to Kathie Fanslow's other needs because it happened to us. And it was an incredible happening, really. We had 2 young women, both who had AIDS. One was 36, and the other was 28. Rosemary was 28. She had 3 small children. She contracted AIDS from her husband, who had died from it. She lived in a town outside of Rochester. Her own mother could not say the word. And the day that we thought that Anna, who was the other mother, Anna was very different. Rosemary looked like a child. Someone said to me the night before, she said, she looks like a child of 12, and she did. She was beautiful. And the other girl, Anna, had had a very different sort of life. She'd been on the streets, she'd been incarcerated, she had just very many things that had happened to her. She was really such a neat person. She says she's the one that said to me, people walked away from me when they learned that I had AIDS. And so the afternoon that we thought that Anna was dying, we went into Rosemary's room and sat down and said, we just wanted you to know that Rosemary, it appears that she's going to die today. They were aware of one another. They had never met one another. And so I said, she said, we said, well, we told her different things. Well, she started asking questions. Is she awake? Is she in pain? And so there were several questions that she asked. And then there was a long pause. She looked at me with such intensity, and she said, do you have a memory of Anna? And I thought, oh my God, she's wondering if anyone will remember her. Her own mother could not say the word. And I said, oh, honey, yes. And I told her the memories I had. Oh, she's a strong woman. And I went on to tell her different things that I had learned from her. Okay, I finished. Not enough. She turns to Margaret. Do you have a memory of her? And of course, Margaret told her what she would remember. And we thought, oh my God, she thinks that no one will remember her. So in the 11 days that followed, we said to each person who came to visit her, if it was the first time they were there, we would take them aside and say, please, you must tell her how you will remember her. She needs to know that she will be remembered. But isn't that a powerful lesson? I think that young girl, looking like 12-year-old child, saying, do you have a memory? She was worried that no one would even remember her. So I think that day it is such a strong memory for me. I will never ever forget this, that she had said such a thing. Okay, the inward, and I think we're doing okay, Kathie? Okay. You know, we often said that it was all in the spirit, this business of dying. So much of it is work of spirit. And it's been called the thin place, the dying time, or in the between, or the nearing time, which I think we more often called it. Do you still call it the nearing time? Because that's exactly what it is. It's a time that's characteristic, different characteristics define it. One of them is a disengaging. Maria was a beautiful young woman who had two siblings, and there was a picture on the mantle in the front room of the three sisters together. They were lovely, and one day she said, please take that picture down. I don't want to see it I don't want to see it. That's separating from what had been, stepping back. So, of course, we did take it away, took it right down. The withdrawing. Jim was a guidance counselor in the school and beloved. The stream of visitors that came to see him, there were many. And one day he said to me, I don't think I like myself very much. I'm not feeling very friendly today. I don't think I want any visitors. He said, my wife and the children can come, but no one else. And we won't talk. I just want them to be here, but it will be quiet. And I said, oh my Jim, you're a wise soul. You have much to do, don't you? The work of soul that we often talk about. My goodness. And so that's what we did. No one else came to visit him, and his wife sat at his bedside all day. The children came quietly for a time and then left. I was was with him through his last night. He was conscious until maybe 2 hours before he died, at 8:45 the next morning. And I thought, he had work to do. He had some of what is called the soul work. I have a little book that's called, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of it, it's called Mortally Wounded. Stories of soul pain, death, and healing. And I have one for you. At any rate, we learned about this along the way. It was written by an Irish physician, Michael Carney. And Michael Carney is now living in California. I had the privilege of meeting him in a hall when I was at a teaching event many years ago. Our daughter Elizabeth spent 3 hours with him in Ireland in Our Lady's Hospice, which is the first hospice in Ireland, very old, about like 150 years old. And he's a very wise soul, and he talked a great deal about soul pain. And so there is a lot to be done in that time to work through that pain of whatever nature it is. And as I said, I did this for you, and if anyone's interested, it's different. It's kind of a different book, you will see, but it's very interesting. Now, in that book, there is an introduction by Cecily Saunders. Oh, I really just love that woman so. And she said, those of us who have spent time in the company of people with mortal illness have learned from them that we are always challenged to know more and to help more effectively. But above all, to listen. And we've been talking about that. I've been talking about that. The listening, I think it's the most important thing we do. Just to listen. Just to listen. Let them tell their stories. Let them tell their stories. When I was nursing in the hospital, there was a gentleman that, I just liked him so. And he, I thought he would come in periodically for treatment. And one day, when I finished all my work and my charting, I went back into the room and just sat down with him for a while and started asked him a question, and he began talking. And I just listened and listened and listened. And then there would be applause, and I wouldn't say anything, just waited. And then he would continue on with his story. At the end of this little time, he said, "Oh, that felt so good. I haven't thought of these things in such a long time." Now remember, before I mentioned about the need to tell story, the life story is one of the needs of the dying. It is very truly. And I'll never forget how pleased he was that he was remembering some of these things, some of which were very sad, some of which were very happy, just like all our lives, a mixture, a blending of things. Okay. So. They also are saying, and this was Michael Carney, that the soul work is the hardest work we do. Living each day as if it were our last could make the soul work easier because there would be fewer regrets. So that's a nice reason to live each day as it is and not be looking too far ahead. The permission to die is a sacred permission, really, and it needs to be given. It needs to be given by a certain person. In our very early days, we cared for Velma, and her children were all over the country. And we called them when we thought she was approaching it, but she didn't. And they had all to go back, so they all left. And I was on the phone with someone one day, and she said, "Well, hasn't anyone told her it's all right to die?" I said, "Well, it can't be just anyone." Barbara was caring for someone one day in their home, a young man, and she said to him, "Who is it you need to tell you it's all right to go?" And he told her. And the man was summoned. The man came, he told him, and the gentleman was able to die. but it needs to be the right person. I think that's such a sacred thing, isn't it? It really is. It really is. Permission to die. Khadijah was a woman who was quite lovely, and she suffered. Her physical suffering was so appallingly sad. And one day her brother came to visit her, and her brother and she were very close. And the brother told me that they had a pact that if they were sick or something was happened, they just wouldn't go. They just wouldn't die, because he had been in a car accident and they thought he was going to die, but he didn't. So he thought he could just avoid doing this, and maybe she could too. So she wasn't dying. And oh my, we were just so praying that she would be able to. So I said to him, I explained to him what her condition was and how she had suffered for so long. I said, do you think you could talk to her, maybe, and tell her that she doesn't have to keep that agreement with you any longer? And he went into the room, and an aunt was in the room with him. And she came out and she said, Khadijah has died. She just needed that permission to know that she could go. It was really, we really, I think in hospice we meet so many interesting, wonderful people, don't we? I think our lives are so much richer because of meeting all these lovely people and hearing all these stories and seeing different ways of managing things. Hearing is the last of the senses to depart, and that is wonderful that it is. Lois was about in her 40s, and she was with us just a few days, and we thought she was going to be with us much longer, and so we were very surprised on a Saturday morning, just days after she had come, that she was very near her death. The telephone rang. The other caregiver, who was a wonderful gentleman who had cared for his wife at home when she died, and then became a volunteer. Bernie was on one side of the bed, I was on the other. It was 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and we thought, oh my, it will be any moment now. And the phone rang, and it was his daughter, and she was out of state. And so I said to her, honey, listen, your mom is very near her death now, but she can hear you. So I'm going to put the phone to her ear, and you talk to her, because she will hear you. And so I put the phone to her ear, and she talked to her for some length of time, and then her mother died. And I said, honey, your mom has died. She heard you very clearly, and she had a beautiful smile on her face when she died. And you need to know that. And I think there are beautiful stories around our hearing, aren't there? About times that people are able to hear, and they couldn't other times. So I just loved that. I loved that she had called right at that moment. Why had she called right at that moment? Isn't that wonderful? A little divine intervention, perhaps. I do believe in that too. Okay. All righty, let me see. Now, the wisdom of the dying and the choice of the moment. This was another thing that Kathie Quinlan taught us in 1987. The wisdom of the dying and the choice of the moment. Many years ago, we had a bereavement gathering in the rectory at Corpus Christi, upstairs in the living room. And when it was over and everyone was leaving, a young woman approached me. And she said, could I talk to you for a few minutes? And I said, of course, of course. So we went over to our sofa and sat on the sofa. And I said, I will tell you that her anguish was palpable to me. It was just very interesting. And I said, tell me, what has happened? And she said, well, my dad was very ill, And my mom and I were taking care of her at home, taking care of him at home. And oh my goodness, it was the morning, we'd given him his bath, he was all settled in and he was resting. A neighbor came to call, so we left the room. And when the neighbor left, we went back into the room, and my father had died. And I wasn't there. He was alone. Oh my goodness. The anguish of her story was so, as I said, it was palpable. So I thought, oh dear. And I said, well, honey, tell me a little bit about your dad. Well, he was kind of a loner. The first words out of her mouth, wasn't that wonderful? He was kind of a loner. I said, darling, he was kind of a loner. He just needed to do that his own way, didn't he? He needed to do it his own way. And she said that, I said, and then she continued to tell me a little bit about him, how he loved to go out in the woods and by himself. And he did have a very, an aspect of his nature that was love solitude, and that was lovely that she could not be. It was almost as if this weight was lifted off her shoulders. She had, well, my dears, I must tell you, her father had died 9 years earlier. She had carried this anguish with her for 9 full years. So, then that story of the loner, I never forgot it. I never forgot her. Because it affected me very much many, many years later. You know, we all know of some stories like this. I know there are people that are in families that will wait in a hospital days and days and they don't leave the bedside, and the nurse will say, why don't you go home, get a shower, have a meal, and come back later? And they leave the hospital, they walk in their door, the phone is ringing. The father has died. You've all heard this story. We know it happens. And yes. So at any rate, he wanted them not to be there. He wanted them not to be there. Which leads me to my story about my Bill. My dear Bill and I were married for 58 years. We courted for 5 years. So we were together for 63 years. He died 5 years ago this July. I miss him more every day. Linda and I were talking about that. Yes. And at any rate, this was just an interesting experience that I had that I will share with you. Bill had been ill for many years. He had had Parkinson's disease and dementia for many years. And so we were, I was so hoping that he would be able to die at home. And he was really doing pretty well. I mean, we were okay. But one day, we had gone, people would say, how are things going? And I'd say, we're holding. And that was such a good word to be able to use and say we were holding. One day we had been out for a couple of appointments, and while we were in the getting to the last appointment, we got out of the car, and Bill became unsteady. I was holding his hand. He became unsteady, and we both fell on the concrete. Thankfully, he was okay. He was all right. But I crushed my olecranon, what is it? You know, the elbow. There's another word for it. What is it? Any of my dearest friends tell me? No, there's another word for it. At any rate, my elbow, I broke my elbow. And it necessitated surgery. And I was in a cast, a metal cast, from my wrist to my shoulder. But I was Bill's caregiver. So what were we going to do? And I said, no, we're going to be fine. We're going to do it. And we did for a week or two, but it was very hard. And the children were concerned because I wasn't able to get rest at night and so on. And I needed to heal. And so we made arrangements for Bill to go for respite care, which he did, and it was to be for 1 month. And while he was there, initially things were going pretty well. I was able to see him every day. I couldn't drive, but friends would be very wonderful to take me over each day so I could spend several hours with him. And then we began noticing that things were changing a bit, and we thought, oh no, Daddy is going in a different direction. And we knew that he was probably going to die. And so they moved him into another room that was very private, and we would be able to have our own little hospice there. They allowed me to, I was part of his care in any way I could be with one arm at that time, at the beginning time. But we got into that room on a Friday, and then when it was probably midweek, we knew that we were going in the other direction. And so we were just all staying with him. He had some seizure activity, so we were wanting to stay with him all the while. And we were all taking turns. Everybody would have a different time that they would come so they could be with him. And it was precious time because everyone had time alone with him, and we had time together with him, and the grandchildren all had time to come and be with him and to just tell him how much, just reminisce, and stories were told, and it was a very precious time. They sang songs, they played the guitar. It was a precious time because, hospice is not a specific place. It's an attitude of care. And so there we were in our little room. So it was the last night I had gotten, actually, fortuitously, Alecranon is the word, Alecranon. At any rate, I was there the last night by myself, and he had very high fever, and I thought, I think it seems Bill is very near. He's very near. And so I called the children, and they came as they had done twice before. When whoever was there at night, if they sensed a change, they would call the others, and we would come, as families do. And so there we were, and we sat about the bed, and we waited many hours. And in the morning, I called them at 2. In the morning, about 9:30, a hospice nurse came by, and she said, "Has he been alone at all?" And I said, "No." Well, I said, "Yesterday, I think we left the room for 20 minutes or 10 minutes or something. We were there pretty much of the time." Now, you see, I had this discussion with families many times about needing some time alone, but this was by Bill. And so I couldn't have it with myself. I didn't have it with myself. And so when she said, "Has he been alone?" We said, "Well, no, not in the last while." And she said, "You might want to try that." And so we all looked at one another and said, "Oh dear, well, what are we going to do? I guess we need to leave the room." And so we, one by one, went to the bedside and whispered in his ear and walked out the door. I was the last to leave. And when we got outside, there was a little kind of a sitting room nearby. We sat there and watched the clock. We didn't want anyone to go in the room. He was to be totally by himself. When it was 20 minutes, I stood up and ran. I did not walk. I ran into the room. And of course, he had died. And I said, "Oh, darling," I think I said, "Oh, darling, you did it." Because he did. And I thought, oh dear. Now I will tell you, leaving that room was probably the hardest thing I ever had done. But I knew, of course I knew, and I had known it with so many families, but how different it is when it's yourself. And so, at any rate, the next day, I think I was talking to Kristen, and she started to say, the big question, were you there? I said, "Oh, Kristen, wait till I tell you what happened." Because it was just what I hadn't hoped it would be. But what it told us, I think as nurses and as people who are with caring for the dying, we often would want to say, oh, were you there? But if the person wasn't there, that can impose a lot of guilt upon the person. They can really feel very guilty about that. Our eldest daughter, was talking with a friend shortly after Bill died, and the girl said, well, tell me about it. So sorry about your dad. Tell me about it. And they said, oh, let me tell you what happened. And she told her. And the young woman was in tears. And she said, oh my goodness, I'm so glad you told me that. Both of my parents had died, and I was not with them. And I had felt so guilty. So I started thinking, I think we often are quick to say, were you there? Because we knew that the person wanted to be there. But if the answer was no, would that person feel guilty for not having been there? Like the young woman who came to me after the bereavement group and said I wasn't with him. And I've never forgiven myself. And so I think that I've thought a lot about it. And thought, well, maybe we could just say, well, that's just the way. Did your father die peacefully? We could say that. Can you think of other things we might say? But I think to say, were you there? Because many people were not there for many different reasons. Many people couldn't get there, the plane didn't get them there quickly enough, but there are many reasons why people wouldn't be there when they are wanting to. So I just thought, well, I think I will say to someone, if I'm in a situation of like this nature, well, did your dad die peacefully? Or I hope your dad died peacefully. Do you think that sounds pretty good? Maybe. At any rate, well, so that was just such an experience. And I was so grateful to that young woman for telling me her story. And I thought of her a lot when this happened to me and when we were not there. But I think you have been wonderfully patient with me, because I know I just kind of go on and on about so many things that fill my heart, and they really do. They're such a part of me, as I know they are of each of you. It's a beautiful work you do. I think we are so blessed to be with the dying. I used to say to Bill, honey, I think I may die not believing this really happened. But it did. It really happened. And you have to know how astonished I am that it's still there. Thanks to Kathie over here, and to Kristen, and to all of you, that it's still there. I can hardly believe it. And I am overwhelmed with gratitude for you. I truly am. That it would go on for so long. I have one little last thing to do. But at any rate, thank you. Thank you for being there. And for you, honey, for being at Sunset, which is lovely. I've been there many times. But I think you learn so much when you're with the dying, don't you? They're your most wonderful teachers, aren't they? Oh, goodness, no, I think this is a gift beyond my own dark thing. Yes, I know, my mouth is very dry. Oh, gosh. At any rate, Anam Cara, has anyone ever heard of John O'Donohue? Oh, Kathie, of course. We love John O'Donohue. He was an Irish writer who sadly died in his 50s. And did you folks in the back hear me all the time? I'm so sorry about this. It's hard to keep it in a particular place. John O'Donohue has written some lovely works. One of them is called Anam Cara, which means soul friend. But in the very back, he has a section for each time of our lives. And he has a prayer for death. And I thought, oh yes, I need to share that with you. Oh my goodness, well, wait a minute here. Because it's so lovely, why did I take out my card that I had in there? Oh, Kathie, I have to find it because I thought that would be a perfect way to close. I have it, thank you, honey. Okay.
All right. This is John O'Donohue's blessing for death. I pray that you will have the blessing of being consoled and sure about your own death. May you know in your soul that there is no need to be afraid. When your time comes, may you be given every blessing and shelter that you need. May there be a beautiful welcome for you in the home that you are going to. Oh, I forgot. I'm so sorry. Did you hear me? Did you hear it? Oh, goodness, I'm sorry.
All right. May there be a beautiful welcome for you in the home that you are going to. You are not going somewhere strange. You are going back to the home that you never left. May you have a wonderful urgency to live your life to the full. May you live compassionately and creatively and transfigure everything that is negative within you and about you. When you come to die, may it be after a long life. May you be peaceful and happy and in the presence of those who really care for you. May your going be sheltered and your welcome assured. May your soul smile in the embrace of your Anamkara. So, thank you so much for taking the time to come this evening.
This is her. I want to give you one. Yeah, just take it.
Does anybody have any questions for Kathie?
I think it would be lovely, and I'm going to do this, is to share a moment at Isaiah House that taught us about death and send it to you.
Oh, my. That would be beautiful. I would love that.
I mean, the whole time you're talking, I'm thinking of a particular
Me too.
story.
Oh, Diane, thank you for saying that. That would be lovely. Just knowing that it's still there. This is so astonishing to me, as I said. It really is. Goodness, well, I never thought I would be this long. I'm quite surprised that I'm still here. Goodness gracious. Thank you for listening so attentively, and I hope it's made some sense to you, but I
Always
just...
does.
And it's certainly been because of you guys too that we're still there. Me, Kathy, you, Kristen,
Yeah.
but it's you guys who really do the
Of
work.
course, without you, there would be no Isaiah House. No, I know that, we know that. I knew it from day one, all the way
Absolutely.
along. Whenever there was a time that was a little scary. Oh dear, but then we'd be okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.